Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Estrel. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be the service leader today. Please note that we are happy to have you here. We are a welcoming, lay-led spiritual community, moving together in time in an open search for truth and meaning. We believe in people's inherent capacity to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment, pursuing the good of humanity. Just a reminder that this service is being both live streamed and recorded. Anything you say will therefore be publicly available online, although there are times that we will pause the recording and we'll let you know when those times happen. If you are visiting us today, we welcome you. Please note that you can complete the form at decorah.org/contact-us to receive our weekly electronic newsletter or to learn more about our congregation. You can learn more about Unitarian Universalism at uua.org. And Julie Fisher wants to know, why can't I hear you? Can other folks hear me okay? Okay. Julie, it may be that your speaker is off and you need to adjust the volume on your computer. If you continue to have problems with the audio, you can call in on your phone to listen at the same time that you watch on the computer. The details for calling in are at decorahuu.org on the Zoom details news items. You can open that up to see what the phone number is to listen if you continue to have problems on the computer. And this is a good idea, Madison. Someone might want to text her these directions if she can't hear you. Carolyn, could you please put everything I just said into the chat? Way to go, Madison. Okay. And then I think we're ready for the next slide, whenever that can happen too. I'm really making Carolyn work this morning. Okay, today's service relates to UU Principle 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And then the announcements. All right, so we've got a few announcements, many of which are also in the bulletin, which is accessible online from our website, decorahuu.org. Note that there's a request from Carolyn, send us your photos. Please send us a photo of yourself and you or your clan. We want to share your photos in upcoming services. You can send photos directly to Carolyn at corbingroup.biz. The next trustees meeting is coming up Tuesday, February 2nd, 7 at Zoom. The members for the trustees are listed in the bulletin and on the screen. The Decorah Community Food Pantry continues to need volunteers as well as donations. If you want to donate, you can visit decorahpantry.org. And Collective Action for Racial Equity, which is also called CARE, meets on third Tuesdays on Zoom. Carolyn's a good contact for that as well if you're interested in joining Carolyn at corbingroup.biz. Are there more announcements in the Google slideshow itself, Carolyn? No, okay. So are there other announcements that folks would like to lift up or add? If so, you can raise your hand. They changed where the raise hand feature is. It is now under reactions, or you can enter something in the chat, and I'll give phone only participants an opportunity to share too in just a moment. Any hands raised? Doesn't look like it. If you are on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute. Okay, I think that we're done with announcements then. All right. Please remain on mute, but read along at home with me as we light the chalice. We light this chalice to to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. And these words were adapted from Annie Dillard. So our theme for this month is nature. And our theme for the year is drawn from the 2020 Unitarian Universalist Association's National Gathering General Assembly, Rooted, Inspired, and Ready. When we plan services, we think about the monthly theme, the yearly theme, and other things like which holidays are occurring on or near the day of the service. In this case, the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat, literally New Year of the Trees, and often referred to as the Jewish Earth Day, was just celebrated beginning at sunset on the 27th and concluded the evening of the 28th. And tomorrow is Imbolc, the Gaelic traditional festival marking the beginning of spring, celebrated as a holiday by neo-pagans. It's also known as Bridget's Day. So I threw all of this information at Madison when I asked him to speak and invited him to use any of it for inspiration as he considered what we'd like to talk about. When he came back to me with the description of the talk, I was amazed at how deftly he was able to weave together all of the above while also addressing other urgent issues. So during his presentation, we will work together to imagine the vibrancy of the natural world and explore how these imaginations can give us conviction and inspiration for our daily living in the here and now. By engaging with historic and contemporary fantasies and images of trees of life, from Yggdrasil to the Garden of Eden, we can root, inspire, and ready ourselves to do the work of building a just world in a time when fantasy has, in the words of J.R.R. Tolkien, often veered into the morbid delusions and idols of white supremacist and fascist violence. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Madison will be sharing. In anticipation of his words and in a slightly belated celebration of Tu B'Shvat, let's remain on mute, but sing along with our opening song, Get Out and Plant a Tree by Sheer Soul, based on Black Horse and the Cherry Tree by K.T. Tunstall. You will hear some Hebrew in the song, including ilano, which is the word for trees.
Whoa, whoa. Well, I came to a place that I used to know where I'd play in my house up in a tree. Now it's just a stump and it occurred to me that things just ain't what they used to be. Cause we keep chopping you to your knees, but you're giving us all the air we breathe. So I decided right then that me and my friends, we gonna get together and plant some seeds. No. Get out and plant a tree. Eli, no. Get out and plant a tree. No. Get out and plant a tree. Sing it, Elano. Get out and plant a tree. Get out and plant a tree.
Thanks, Carolyn. I realized I forgot to ask you to turn on closed captioning for that. So that's okay. I was wondering, I don't see it on my co-host side, but on your host side, do you see an option under more to turn on closed captioning for this service? Try live transcript. Nothing? Okay, that's all right. Oh, it looks like it's there. All right, excellent. Sometimes we'll be able to see the words on the screen because they're in the slideshow, but sometimes we won't. And so in a spirit of accessibility, we want to get into the habit of using closed captioning whenever we can. And Zoom just introduced this fairly recently as a free service. Before, it used to be that you had to assign somebody to type, or you had to get a third-party API transcription service. So we're excited to try this new free service offered through Zoom, again, to make our services more accessible to folks who may have issues being able to hear everything, whether that is because of their own hearing impairments or because of technological difficulties, which we know can happen. For instance, right now, Julie Fisher was having a hard time hearing, but now at least she'd be able to read what was on the screen. All right, so let's move on to the land acknowledgement. As has been our practice, we acknowledge the traditional indigenous inhabitants of the land. In Northeast Iowa, we acknowledge this area was home to the Iowa, whose traditional name is Bakoche, the Sac and Fox, the Fox's traditional name is Nisquaquie, the Dakota, and the Ho-Chunk, peoples whose relationship to this land continues today. Acknowledgement is a critical public intervention, a necessary step toward honoring Native communities and enacting the much larger project of decolonization and reconciliation. I invite you to take a moment for reflection upon the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have shaped our presence here today, and to adopt an attitude of reverence and gratitude for the ongoing resilience of this place and the people who have called it home. Next slide, please. This is the time in our service when we invite anyone who wishes to do so to share with us a joy, a sorrow, a concern, a milestone in your life. Again, the raise hand feature has changed from being under participants to instead being under reactions. You'll click on the raise hand to be acknowledged, and then you'll click on it again to lower your hand. I am going to begin joys and sorrows with Sue Audie, who has a special message to share with us today.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning to everyone. As you know, many of you, at the end of January, we customarily have a Sunday to honor and celebrate our beginnings as the UU congregation. We expect to be back at our church home at the Lingonberry next year in January, where we'll be able to celebrate with all of our members and enjoy the memorabilia which documents our life together. For now, we take a few moments to think about our early days in 2003 and the years following, and all of the folks who helped to make it happen. You know who you are, and we lift you up silently with all of our gratitude. After coronavirus brought the change from our in-person to our Zoom Sunday mornings, we needed folks with new and different skills. They stepped up. We are very fortunate in having them. I light a virtual candle this morning now for them, for Karen Esterl, for Carolyn Corbin and Otter Dreaming, as well as our Sunday service leaders who continue to volunteer, and members who have told their stories over this past year. Steve Grove and Lyra McKnight are a few. Thanks to all of you who have helped our fellowship thrive this year. We're grateful.
Thank you, Sue. Are there other joys or sorrows? If you're on the phone, you can hit *6 to unmute. We may be a quiet bunch today.
I'll share a concern. I guess it was very late November, early December, my aunt passed away from COVID. And this is my dad's sister, and I just know that it's still difficult for him, especially of everyone in the family. This is the person who is struggling with it the most, the person who's closest to her. So I'd ask that we remember and send light to him as he continues to mourn the loss of his sister, and our whole family as we mourn Sheila's loss together.
Thank you, Madison. Beth.
I feel like we should light a candle for Harvey Benson, who turned 90. Just, I don't remember which day it is, but within the last few days, he just turned 90. So happy birthday, Harvey.
I happened to see Harvey at the co-op on his birthday, and he was right there. So I led everyone in a happy birthday. So he was very happy and excited to get all the cards he did.
Well, I will light a virtual candle for all the joys and sorrows that are in our hearts but remain unspoken. Please join me in a moment of silence. Please remain on mute, but sing along at home as we sing our response. I'm going to be introducing Madison, our speaker at length, in a little bit, but in the meanwhile, Madison McClendon is going to share with us a reading for us to contemplate during our service. Madison?
This is from On Fairy Stories by J.R.R. Tolkien, published in the same year he published The Hobbit. Fantasy is a natural human activity. It certainly does not destroy or even insult reason, and it does not either blunt the appetite for nor obscure the perception of scientific verity. On the contrary, the keener and clearer is the reason, the better fantasy will it make. If humans were ever in a state in which they did not want to know or could not perceive truth, facts, or evidence, then fantasy would languish until they were cured. If they ever get into that state, it would not seem at all impossible. Fantasy will perish, and become morbid delusion. For creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, on a recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. So upon logic was founded the nonsense that displays itself in the tales and rhymes of Lewis Carroll. If humans really could not distinguish between frogs and kings, fairy stories about frog kings would not have arisen. Fantasy can, of course, be carried to excess. It can be ill done. It can be put to evil uses. It may even delude the minds out of which it came. But of what human thing in this fallen world is that not true? We have conceived not only elves, but we have made false gods out of other materials, our notions, our banners, our monies. Even our sciences and our social and economic theories have demanded human sacrifice. Abusus non tollit usum, which in Latin means abuse does not negate proper use. Fantasy remains a human right. We make in our measure and in our derivative mode because we are made, and not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker.
Thank you. So it is now the time for the offering. Even though we are meeting via Zoom, we continue to require the gracious gifts of our members and friends to support our congregation. We understand that present circumstances and uncertainty may affect your ability to provide financial support at this time, but if you can and would like to give, if you're online, you can visit decorahuu.org and click on the Give Online button in the middle of the page to learn of numerous ways to give. I always like to highlight that this is not just PayPal. There are other ways that you can give, including automatic monthly donation, which I have done because otherwise I might forget. If you are participating by phone, if you do not have internet access, you may mail your check to Decorah UU, P.O. Box 382, Decorah, Iowa 52101. That's P.O. Box 382. Note that part of our fellowship's commitment and outreach to our community is to support worthy organizations. This month's recipient is Thunder Road, R-O-D-E, Therapeutic Writing. So you can choose, if you're donating online and using PayPal, to send to the monthly recipient. You can also indicate that in the memo line of your check if you're sending in a check. And I believe that their website is thunderroad.org. Again, that's R-O-D-E, not R-O-A-D, if you would like to learn more about that therapeutic writing organization. In honor of the ways we support our congregation and our community, we will now sing the offertory. Please remain on mute, but sing along at home. So Madison McClendon is our speaker today. And I've managed to, there we go. I have about 3,000 things open, y'all. So I'm going to be looking over to my left as I read this. He is a candidate for ordination in the American Baptist Churches USA and did his MDiv alongside secular humanist, Jewish, and Muslim friends at the University of Chicago. He brings to our table a keen interest in how imagination and fantasy and creative visions can promote sense of purpose and direction and action in a world badly in need of goodwill and positive change. I'm going to invite folks to stop your video feed for now so that we can focus on Madison. However, there may be times as he speaks that we will be engaging in conversation, at which point he may invite you to turn your video feeds back on. Madison, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Karen, for the invitation, and thank you to your whole community for extending it. It is always, I think, a holy thing to be invited and to accept an invitation and to do that with care. One thing, I love this Zoom auto transcription, so that's going to be one of the gifts that I bring back to my community when I return next week, is how to use this auto transcription. Even though as a preacher who likes to be fairly precise with what I say, it makes me a little nervous what it might interpret me as saying. But I love that accessibility feature. I love that ability for folks to communicate better. I'm one of these people who can't watch television without subtitles, so I understand the gift that brings to a community. The other thing I wanted to say as I get started is, I'm a preacher. I have this bad habit that we all get into, I think, us preachers, from listening to other preachers and doing too much of the same kind of community thing. Sometimes when I preach, I'll say, we feel this way, we, this is what we think. When I often mean I, or I mean a we in the sense of a community I'm a part of that not everyone is. So I just want to say that at the beginning. I may go off on an extemporaneous tangent and say we too much. If at any point something I say we on doesn't feel like it applies to you, I want you to know that that's okay. That is not necessarily a mark against you, that you don't feel the same way I do, even though I've sort of been imprecise in my language. And I'd love to invite you to talk to me about it. I'll be on at the end of this for a little bit if anyone does want to have a reflection. And so I wanted to just say that outright. If at any point something feels like it doesn't quite fit to you, I think that's a wonderful opportunity for you to speak up at some point and say, this is how this feels different for me. I think our differences on these matters, on anything we talk about, are critically important. And we'll get into that a little bit in a second. And the final piece of sort of prologue is I'm a Baptist, and I've tried to pare this down to the focus, but I tend to go on. And so I appreciate you taking however long this takes for us to discuss today. I think we've got a fun little exercise plan that will rely on y'all being willing to share a little with me. And so I hope that you jump right into that when we get there in a second. But one of the things I wanted to start right immediately with something that has occupied, I think, a lot of our passions and attentions over the past month. And it was that during the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, I'm sure many of you watched more or less the same way I did, with a kind of horror and fear. And for me, there was the fear that people were going to be killed. I think that was foremost in many of our minds. But it was also a fear for me that institutions of American democracy, such as it is, imperfect as it is, might not hold. And so watching as what appeared to be either police underestimation or possible collaboration with and of the threat of right-wing nationalism, I was scared. I worried as those barricades around the Capitol started to fall, because those barricades were, in a sense, metaphors as well of the interdependent web of relationships which constitutes democratic values and democratic principles. Those are barricades against things falling apart too. And despite the fact that many things happen in Congress that I personally find detestable, I mean, Congress regularly fails to deliver for poor people, for people of color, for queer people like myself. Or even worse, sometimes Congress like actively contributes to their oppression. Despite all that, what was happening in Congress that day was the certification of something true, which is that a coalition of a diverse set of voters, a multi-ethnic and socioeconomic group that included queer people of all their stripes and all their colors, they had made their decision known that not only did they not want to be ruled by white supremacy for the rest of their lives, but also made that decision in a way that said they constituted a majority of the country. A majority strong enough to overcome all the structurally unfair advantage afforded to their opponents by quirks of geography and the structurally racist systems we had. And so that was what was under attack. But I had kind of forgotten that on that day. And so I was simply watching the attack from a place of despair, imagining that we might be witnessing the collapse of that project entirely. And then I saw a friend comment, and I forget whether they were sharing this comment of their own idea, or if they were passing along someone else's, but it simply said this. It said, think about what it means that it is easier for you to imagine the collapse of civilization than it is for you to imagine what civilization might look like if we ended white supremacy. And so I was pretty taken aback by that because for me that day, that's what I was guilty of. I was finding it far easier to imagine what it would look like if society fell apart on that day than imagining what the possibilities might look like if what small, imperfect, tiny moment that was being represented in what was going on in the Capitol, what it might look like if that process by which the will of a multi-ethnic coalition was acknowledged might expand, might flourish, might grow to be something bigger, something more real, something more liberative for a lot of people. And the more I've been thinking about this moment where my own kind of imagination didn't quite hit the mark, the more I've been thinking that it's the same for a lot of people right now. It was certainly true of the mob that attacked the Capitol. This is where that Tolkien bit I had us read through really struck true to me. I think of QAnon, I think of these conspiracy theories, these wild ideas, despite all evidence and reason that the election was somehow stolen. They culminate in this sort of delusive morbidity, this anger, this imagination where the only thing that's what someone can imagine is focused on is what might be taken from them, what they might stand to lose, what little privilege they might not have anymore. And that works itself out in these terrible, violent ways. And I think over the past 4 years, have sometimes found my imagination constrained that way too. You know, I think it's especially true for people who suffer under oppression, that we can sometimes spend every day simply trying to survive against whatever new indignity is going to be foisted upon us, that our imaginations become limited and truncated. And so one of the things I wanted to do today as we get started is do a little, I loved the theme that you had for January. I loved the idea of focusing on nature because it gives us the opportunity, I think, to do a little exercise. An exercise which I hope can help us imagine what it would be like if we lived in a world where we actively tried every day to increase the quality of our imagination, the quantity of our imagination, the ability of our imaginations to think expansively and broadly about what different kinds of visions look like. You know, J.R.R. Tolkien had a real distaste for animation and illustration. His publishers were always trying to push him to illustrate his books, and he was always doing it, but under duress. And he said in a letter that he didn't like that because whenever he described a tree in his books, if he were to illustrate it, then the reader reading and seeing that illustration would imagine his tree, the tree that represented to him what was most tree-like about a tree. And what he wanted was for the person reading his book to imagine their tree. He wanted them to imagine the tree that was the primordial tree for them, the tree that was core to who they were and not core to who he was. He wanted them to feel that natural vibrancy in themselves and not merely sort of through him as a vehicle for it. And so in a time of imaginative scarcity, I want us to do an imaginative work together. I want us to take imagination seriously and try to increase that quality and quantity of it that I was talking about. So I'd like to see if you would be willing to explore in your own imaginations with me what a tree is, what a tree looks like, what a tree can give to the world, what a tree has. So I'm going to start it. I'm going to do this in 4 different motions. As Karen said, just feel free to raise your hand using the react in the chat and share your idea. And it can be, probably should be, because we're a lot of folks, a word, a phrase, something that quickly comes to mind that can be what a tree is like for you. And we'll start with physical descriptions. What is a tree like physically? And feel free to raise your hand. I'll start. The first thing I think of when I think of trees is I think of seeds. I think of acorns. I think of nuts. I think of seeds. So what do you think about when you think of a tree? And I'm going to take some notes as we build our tree together.
And I'll note that those of us who are co-hosts are unable to raise our virtual hands. So we'll just have to speak up if we have a notion that we want to share. I'll go ahead and say the first thing I think of is the huge oak tree that was in my front yard growing up. That became kind of the paradigm or paragon of trees for me. I see Lynn put in the chat that there's homes for birds. Other ideas people want to write in the chat or raise hands? Sue.
I think of roots right away, just the deep roots that just makes me feel so grounded. I love that image.
Lolly?
Shade.
Shade.
Shade is a great one.
And for phone-only participants, remember you can use *6 to unmute and then you press *6 to remute. Other images folks would like to share?
I'll say I think about trees in my yard growing up. You were mentioning oak trees, and we had those too. And they always, one tree, if it got really old, could sometimes be like 4 trees in one because it would have 4 massive trunks all split off from the same trunk.
Mm-hmm. Maggie Hayden contributed in the chat, strength and solidity. And Lyra McKnight, we had walnut trees in our yard, gathering walnuts and selling them.
Great. All right, I'm gonna ask us to kind of shift our attention here. And we already kind of had part of this already when someone said, I think it was in the chat. Yeah, it was Lynn said homes for birds. And I want us to ask a question. Who are the residents of a tree? Who lives in the tree?
Insects.
Insects.
And I think I saw Julie looks like she's ready to talk.
That's what I was going to say. Insects in the oak tree, over 500 different kinds of insects gain their nutrition and cover from an oak tree. So it's one of the most productive of all.
Amazing. 500 different kinds.
Right?
Just one kind of class of animal. It's amazing.
Beth wrote squirrels in the chat.
Squirrels.
Sue shared ancestors.
Ancestors. That's beautiful. I think of spiders. And I'll come back to that in a second. But
Which I will note are distinct from insects. So there you go.
all right, and we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about walnut trees and gathering and selling sort of the product of the tree. What are some of the gifts of a tree? What are its gifts?
Beth says maple sap.
Maple sap.
Lynn shares beauty. Julie.
Strength, the strength of holding the soil.
Holding the soil together. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting too, how earlier in the physical description, we brought up strength and solidity, but that can also be a gift too. So it's sort of, its gift is tied into what it is in an interesting kind of way.
Not to forget the oxygen.
Right.
Yeah, several people have been uplifting that in the chat. Carolyn had mentioned that. Matthew said carbon cycle. Maggie also said oxygen. Matthew mentioned connections.
Yeah.
And Carolyn mentioned nutrients into the soil. Lyra mentioned shelter from the rain and wind and weather. And I would like to echo what Lolly mentioned earlier. I think shade is a gift that the tree.
And there's something we can't live without very easily, and that is the fibers of the wood in paper and many, many products that we use. Not to mention firewood.
Gathering place. I like gathering place. So I'm going to go to my last question in this sort of imagination of the tree and ask sort of, what do you think are the spiritual, either spiritual trees? I mentioned in my description Yggdrasil. I mentioned the tree of life from Genesis. So you might have a specific spiritual tree in mind, but also what are the spiritual gifts, spiritual aspects of trees that we might want to think about? And I went ahead and put ancestors in here as well, because I think that there's a deep spiritual connection there worth mentioning.
Endurance, overcoming many hardships in weather and injuries.
I think that our spirits are fed by beauty. So when we see something as beautiful as trees can be, that's nourishing for our souls. Lyra wrote longevity, trees that have known my grandfather.
I love that. Inspire connection. All right, I think we have a great list. I appreciate your willingness to kind of join me on that, because I do think there's this amazing opportunity to sort of explore together what a tree can look like. And I love too that, we didn't quite get into it, but you know, I'm sure some of us are thinking of like a walnut tree. I'm thinking of oak trees. Someone's probably thinking of apple trees. And one of the things I love about imagining our tree is that certainly you don't have a walnut and an apple tree that exists in the same tree in the real world. But when we do this imaginative work together, we can imagine that tree, right? We can imagine this tree that's dripping with cherries and fruit, and maybe even fruit that doesn't grow on trees, as well as nuts and seeds and acorns, just this bounteous tree that can exist in our imagination, that may not exist in the real world proper, but is rooted in what a real tree is like. And so that's where I want to get us started in the second half here, in thinking about ways that trees can be opportunities for reimagining our current world. And the first way that comes to my mind immediately is just the vibrancy and diversity of what they are. You know, I felt a little spiritual shiver go down my spine when it was brought up 500 different kinds of insects living side by side in these trees. In just one species, in just one species of tree, you had that many kind of insects that were integrally part of what it meant to both keep that tree alive, what it meant for that tree to be providing sort of a space for its community to flourish and grow and become more. Um, and the trees can do so many things. You know, when they are at the end of their life, we can use them for wood. When they are in their full flourish of their life, we can use them for fruit, for eating, for sustaining ourselves. We can use them for shade. We can use them for just an absolutely amazing, different kind of uses and values that can exist underneath the umbrella of a tree. And so I think that one thing we can do is we can think about our societies that way, that our societies are vibrant and diverse to begin with. We have folks who are excellent at doing the kinds of stuff that Carolyn and Karen have done for us this morning, and setting up this technical space for us to engage and to think. We can do the kinds of things that some of our folks in our service today, Otter Dreaming, played the beautiful piano music, and that can enrich and develop our lives. We have so many different talents, so many different opportunities, so many different diversity of experiences, that if we can imagine our society as less of a institutional capital and more of a vibrant growing tree, we can create a vision of what it might be like to live side by side. We can imagine what it might be like to let different people offer different gifts in society, and see that as a gift and a hope rather than something to be scared of or something to be worried about. There's another way in which I think this is important, and I like this because it brings in two things. First, it brings us back to, I think, some of the flaws that J.R.R. Tolkien had, and it brings us back to this question of Principle 7 in the UU Principles that you shared this morning. And the way in which I want to criticize Tolkien, and I think you can criticize him for a lot of things, but he had a real hatred of spiders. I don't know if anyone has read much of his work, but there's things written. He was apparently chased around the house in South Africa by like a big tarantula once when he was like 2, and it comes through in his writing that this is a childhood phobia, because he's always talking about webs of horror. He's always talking about terrible spiders that chase his protagonists, that trap his protagonists, that attack his protagonists. And spiders are always the villain for J.R.R. Tolkien. But I think about this old tree in my grandfather's backyard, which without fail always had a beautiful spider web in it, with a big, like, scary looking spider, to be honest, sitting in the middle of it, but he wasn't bothering anyone. Or actually with Spider, she wasn't bothering anyone. She was just sitting there, a critical part of the ecosystem. And so I think when we get to thinking imaginatively about trees, I get to thinking about how this metaphor that Tolkien uses, webs of horror, and a lot of people are scared by spiders, a lot of people are scared by webs. Suddenly, a tree allows me the opportunity to take this metaphor and shift it and turn it into something good, right? To turn it into something that this web is another one of these places where things can live. This web is another home. This web is another piece of a vastly important ecological puzzle. This web is a metaphor for connection. This web is a metaphor for our reliance on each other. When you pull on one little part of the web over here, it can be felt and seen on this part of the web all the way over here. And so by getting into this imaginative space about what a tree is, we can take metaphors that are hurtful and transform them into metaphors that are healthy. And I think an example of how we can live side by side, there are a lot of good examples. The ones that come to my mind are the increasing willingness, I think, of marginalized people to stand up and say that the way we are talked about in public is not acceptable. So using slurs as just stand-in for this so dumb. So, I've heard people say that's so gay as a slur. And to be able to say, no, that's not, you're using a metaphor there. The metaphor is gay is equal to stupid. But what would it mean to use the metaphor that's so gay as in that's so lovely, that's so beautiful, that's so holy, that's so vivacious, that's so connected? What would it mean if we were to transfer the metaphors? There are a lot of metaphors in the society at large that connect fat to badness, that connect being fat to being lazy. But what if we connected it to being bountiful, being abundant, living with vivaciousness and verve, living in acknowledgement of our body's needs and not denial of them? There are ways when we start thinking in imaginative and creative ways that we can take what was a metaphor that was causing hurt and harm, or a metaphor that was scary and frightening, and translate that into a way of thinking about not only the metaphor, but the people the metaphor inscribed itself onto, in ways that allow them to become a full part of the community, allow them to grow and join our communities, and allow us to be less exclusive of the kinds of things that might make us uncomfortable or might make us scared. So thinking about the tree, thinking about our imaginative space gives us this opportunity. The final thing I want to say, and it may not be the final thing. We'll see. It's about 10:53. I don't want to hold up your time too much, but the trees take both immediate care and long-term commitment. A tree doesn't grow in a day. A lot of trees, you can't even grow them from seed. You have to have a sapling of some sort. And so you have to water it at the right times. You have to prune it. You have tasks that you might have to do at different points every day. You might have to, certain seasons, put out something to protect it from the frost. Certain ages, you might have to bring it indoors. I'm sure, I'm from Chicago. I'm sure folks in Iowa have a little more sense of the agricultural realities of trees than I do. But so I'm sure you could probably help me on this. But there are these tasks that must be done regularly and with care immediately. Even if sort of the long-term vision of this fully grown, mature oak tree that is home to 500 insects and is dropping its acorns everywhere to create more trees, that's not realized yet. And so I think about your announcements. Working and donating with the Decorah Food Pantry, it's pruning your tree, right? That's getting your tree ready to grow and flourish. Joining the Collective Action for Racial Equality group, and you can contact Carolyn about it. That's a way to water your tree. You know, we have this vision, we've set this vision of this vibrant, diverse tree where metaphors can be reshaped and thinking can be reshaped. We have that in view, but these are places where we can actually get out and get the tree ready and water it. I am going to say the final thing. The thing that matters to me about a tree, when I think about my tree, I think about that oak tree in my grandfather's yard. And I think about how much fun it was the year that he came out and threw a rope over one of the thickest branches and attached a tire to it. And for the next, must have been a decade. Every time I visited my grandfather's house, the tree was a place where I could play, where I could swing with my cousins, where I could push my brother up and down, where we could take turns, where we could understand the tree as a place where we could be happy and joyful. And so I would want us not to lose sight as we try to build our society of a society where we can play together in joy and happiness, and what it would be like if we built a world where people could feel safe enough to get in the tire swing and swing from the tree's branches. So, if we are to imagine democracy as a tree, let's continue doing what we did today with that exercise and imagine more fully what our political world can do. Can we imagine a democracy without prisons? Can we imagine a democracy without war? Can we imagine a democracy where everyone has enough to eat? Instead of stopping your imagination and saying why any of these things couldn't work, always be alert to the ways that there might be even more imaginative work left to do. Maybe we don't stop at a single tree, but we imagine an orchard. Maybe when our mental orchard is built, we think of the streams that irrigate it. Maybe when that's done, we imagine the mountains from which the streams flow. And maybe some days we take a break from imagining new things and just take a walk in the orchards you've already imagined, or sailed on the streams and oceans of your mind, or climb the frosty peaks of this shared endeavor together and delight in finding something new, something that you never dreamed up yourself. Or have someone who's on the journey with you point out a quality of the light, a new creature or a fruit, or something your own imagination could never have seen if they weren't with you. We will never build in this world if we cannot dream of something we want to build in this world. So I thank you for taking the time with me today to dream a bit bigger and think a little deeper, and hopefully strengthen your imagination for the difficult days that are still ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madison. And I wanted to note with everybody that Madison indicated that he's willing to stay on after the service if folks want to continue to have conversation. We are going to move to our congregational song for now. I'm going to share a few words about that before we begin singing it. So what we're going to be singing here is one of my spouse's favorite hymns. I was raised Catholic, and I often tease Ellis that for a Protestant minister, they have a great fondness for Catholic songs, as this happens to be one of their favorites. It was written by Rory Cooney, who wrote in his blog about this song's composition. It's based on the Magnificat, the song that Mary proclaims while pregnant with Jesus, beginning with "My soul doth magnify the Lord," a song that Cooney observes parallels the song of Hannah, the mother of Samuel, in 1 Kings, the 2nd chapter. God takes action in the world on behalf of the powerless, the song goes, lifting up the lowly, filling the hungry, tearing the mighty from their thrones. Cooney goes on to say, so in setting this canticle for my parish, I decided that I wanted us to use music that the revolutionary spirit of the canticle, the cosmic tables are being turned over. The idea of turning in the title was both a nod to the inner conceit of revolution, derived from the Latin volvere, which means to turn, and to the message of Jesus's preaching in all three of the synoptic gospels, the core message of which was repent and believe the good news. Repent translates a Greek verb, the noun form of which is metanoia, that is to say a complete change of the self, of mind and heart, which might also be rendered as turn around. The idea, of course, is that we are all walking a particular course dictated by the gods of this world. For Jesus and his countrymen, the god's name was Caesar. Jesus was saying, look, how is that working out for you? Happy? Well, I have good news, a God with another idea, and his name is Abba. Let's turn around and walk in another direction. So the revolution is both interior, a change of heart self, and corporate and visible, a new way of living together. It is, in fact, against the prevailing set of values in society, a revolution. But I want to emphasize that it is a peaceful revolution, a revolution of action, persuasion, and justice. In the spirit of Miriam of Egypt, Hannah, and Miriam of Nazareth, Canticle of the Turning invites us to sing around the fire in the darkness while we await the new world's dawn. Thus ends the quote. So when choosing the closing song for today's service, I'd originally looked for songs that focused on nature, on trees, but I knew that Madison's talk would not be limited to just literal trees. He would be using metaphor. He would be helping us explore fantasy and the role that fantasy has played in justice, both in its obstruction as well as in its advance. So let us, with our microphones on mute, sing along with a song that celebrates a world about to turn. Carolyn.
My soul cries out with a joyful shout that the God of my heart is great, and my spirit sings of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight on your servant's plight, and my weakness you did not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed, could the world be about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, could the world be about to turn. Though I am small, my God, my all, you work great things in me, and your mercy shall last from the depths of the past to the end of the age to be. Your very name puts the proud to shame, and to those who would for you yearn, you will show your might, put the strong to flight, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. From the halls of power to the fortress tower, not a stone will be left on stone. Let the king beware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. The hungry poor shall weep no more for the food they can never earn. There are tables spread, every mouth be fed, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though the nations rage from age to age, we remember who holds us fast. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's crushing grasp. The saving word that our forebears heard is the promise which holds us bound, till the spear and rod can be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near and the world is about to turn. Wipe away all tears, for the dawn draws near and the world is about to turn, to turn.
Please remain on mute, but join with me as we extinguish the chalice. Blessed is the dark in which our dreams stir and are revealed. Blessed is the dark of earth where seeds come to life. Blessed are the depths of the ocean where no light shimmers, the womb of all earthly life. Blessed is the light into which we awake, the light that sparkles on the waters, that calls the tree forth from the seed and calls the shadow forth from the tree. Blessed are we as we move through darkness and through light. If folks want to stay online, we can have some more conversation. Otherwise, have a great Sunday and a great week. And remember that we will not have service next Sunday, but we'll be meeting the Sunday after that.
Thank you, Madison. That was really uplifting, and I really appreciate the chance to work our imaginations for something much brighter than the things that we saw on January 6th.
Yeah, imagination is a muscle we can strengthen, right?
It was a great exercise.
I was particularly interested in your talk about how Tolkien didn't like illustrations because they made everyone's imagination sort of fall into the same thing. And I understand that too. As a quilter and a fiber artist, I'm always trying to create my vision of what something is like. But there's nothing that's more interesting to me than to see all the other visions that people have out there that all come together to make this, the many different ways that we all see the world.
No, yeah, I think that's so critical, right?
This is Julie speaking, Madison. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I've been having trouble figuring out how to get my face to go away when I want my voice to come up. But anyway, I really appreciated your talk. It was very enlightening. I love how it enlarged my appreciation of tree and the metaphor of our society that way. The last lines in the poem by Amanda Gorman, this past inauguration, she says, there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And so we can now add, if only we are brave enough to imagine it too. So thank you very much for your work on this talk.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
I might just ask if you, as you were thinking about Yggdrasil and the weird, I think it's the Norns that are eating away at the roots.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts about that? I mean, I don't think they ever make it.
Right. It's there's a sense, and one of these things is that part of preaching is pruning. Pruning is a good word, because there was a point early on where I was thinking, Tolkien was a good Catholic who used that language of the fallen world in his quote there. And I was thinking about, the wheel of samsara. I was thinking about original sin. I was thinking about all these different things and fretting about, like, I don't want to draw equivalences between them, even if there are similarities. But I do think there are a lot of traditions which have these like beautiful things like Yggdrasil. But then a suggestion somewhere that, like, as beautiful as it is, something's not right. You know, like something's off. That as beautiful and bountiful as the world tree is, from which all the worlds spring, there's something that eats at its roots, right? There's something that makes it so that we can't grasp or fully enjoy and appreciate the bounty that it provides. And that's one of those things where, you know, I'm a little more mature of a preacher than I was when I was 19, because I would have just tried to preach on everything and we would still be in it and y'all would be ready to go to lunch. But but I do think there's a question there that still puzzles me, in that, like, I don't necessarily know what you do with the world serpent, other than to say that the Norse tradition says that the world serpents, when the world serpent becomes a problem, it's going to be the end of time. And so worry about tending to Yggdrasil now, and let the end of time be a problem for the end of time, and live as though Ragnarok has not yet come in your day.
That's a neat way to think about it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's a part in the gospel, one of the extra canonical Gospels of Thomas, where a bunch of people are asking Jesus about, like, the day of wrath, and Jesus is like, why are you asking me about this? The day of wrath isn't going to be good. The day of wrath is going to suck. Like, focus on the day that you're in now, and more than that, focus on Eden, is what Jesus says. Focus on the day of creation and not the day of destruction, because that's where your energy should be right now. And so that's kind of where I fall out on that. You know, ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different opinion.
Hi, Madison. This is Lyra.
Hey.
Thank you so much for your gift of reframing. I was very inspired by your imagery that you painted. One thing in particular spoke to me, and that was Tolkien's writing on fantasy not being a bad thing. My family is very much in the here and now, in the present, and doing things. And I've always been the daydreamer.
Yeah.
And so it was wonderful to hear a quote and a conversation about how fantasy can be a positive thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I think an imagination of the future is the only thing that lets us work well in the present. It's nourishing in a way, whereas I think if you just live right here and look around at what's going on right now, I just want to crawl in a hole, you know, and curl up and, you know, starve to death. Whereas if I can fix my sights on, like, an imagination of what we could be together if we tried harder or did specific kind of work, I'm able to get up and do that. And, you know, bless them, there are people who don't need that the way I do, but but I need it. And so I try to share that with others who might as well.
I'm going to be leaving now, Madison. This is Julie. So I just wish you a lot of good things in your future. It's wonderful that you have pursued this course, and may you have much good fortune in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. You have a good day.
You too.
How much farther do you have to go along in the process, Madison, before you're?
I've already decided I don't want to do my next interview till I can do it in person. I can't do this on Zoom.
Yeah,
So, you know, I'm finishing up my papers, but I'm not on anyone's schedule but mine at this point.
that's fair.
Mine and of course the pandemic.
This is probably a whole different discussion, and it shows my ignorance and my bias, but I was surprised to hear you say you're Baptist.
Mhm.
Because when I think of Baptist, I think of people who are really focused on the word and, you know, this one truth, and not people with much thinking of imagination. I mean, that totally shows my bias, but
No, I get it. I completely get it. You know, I come from a tradition that of sort of leftist progressive Baptists who sort of fled the collapse of the Southern Baptist Convention as it became fundamentalist in the like late 70s and early 80s. And so, like, you know, we definitely, you know, we think of ourselves as like, to use another Tolkien metaphor, when the Isle of Numenor collapsed due to the arrogance of the ship kings, there were like 7 ships of the faithful remnant who got like swept to the shore, and they formed the basis of the later kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. And that's what it feels like. It feels like you're one of the like 7 people in the one boat that got washed up to shore in a tidal wave. You just have to pick up the pieces. And so,
It was everything I could do to restrain myself from interjecting American Baptist, American,
American Baptist.
because, and I know you were probably raised Southern Baptist from Gaffney, but, and this just talking about denominations more generally, Southern Baptist actually used to be one of the more progressive denominations, partially because of the priesthood of the believer. They were among the first to ordain women, for example. But then there was this kind of fundamentalist takeover. We actually have a lot in common with all the Baptist denominations in terms of having congregational polity, where there's not that same kind of hierarchical structure.
Yeah. I often think that like the Baptists are particular, especially the progressive Baptists who lived through that particular trauma, are good people to talk to about what's going on in the culture right now. Because like we lived through it in the 80s. You know, we know what it looks like when your institutions fall captive to right-wing behavior. But yeah, but at the same time, you know, you're right. We're often very rooted in biblical scripture. I said to Karen and Carolyn yesterday that I was actually grateful to be preaching to a UU congregation because I could preach on whatever I wanted. I didn't have to do it to a Bible verse. And I had said that to my pastor. He was like, "You can preach on whatever you want in our church." I was like, "Yeah, that's a trap." I am not taking you up on that offer. So.
Thanks.
So yeah, y'all also you draw things out of me that I don't often get to do. So I appreciate that.
Well, Madison, I personally would be happy to have you back at another occasion.
It would be great.
And maybe even someday when you're here for a visit in Decorah, and we can meet in person.
That could be great. I would love that.
Yep.
You'll have a great community.